"Grandma, don't eat it," my grandson whispered as my daughter placed the plate in front of me. Those 4 words froze my blood. My hands trembled on the white linen napkin, fingers clutching the fabric like a lifeline. 7-year-old Tommy's eyes were wide with absolute terror, darting frantically between his mother Lena and the steaming bowl of beef stew she'd just carefully positioned before me. The same rich, aromatic stew everyone else was already enjoying with obvious pleasure. Everyone except me. I'm Eleanor Patricia Thornton, 72 years old, and I've been completely alone for 15 long, empty years since my beloved husband Charles passed from a sudden heart attack. That particular Sunday dinner was supposed to be a joyous celebration, the first real family meal Lena had bothered to invite me to in over 4 months. The spacious dining room buzzed with animated laughter, Mark's deep, booming voice regaling everyone with dramatic work stories, my 10-year-old granddaughter Sophie giggling at something on her phone screen. It looked like normal, happy family chaos. But absolutely nothing felt normal to me. The expensive mahogany table was set with Lena's finest china, the wedding set I'd saved 3 months of grocery money to buy her 12 years ago. Crystal wine glasses caught the light from the ornate chandelier overhead. Everything looked perfect, elegant, welcoming. Yet an icy dread had settled deep in my stomach the moment I'd walked through their front door. Tommy leaned closer to me, his small warm hand brushing against mine with urgent desperation. "Grandma," he whispered again, his sweet voice barely audible over the loud dinner conversation swirling around us. "Please promise me you won't eat any of it, not even one bite." My heart hammered violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. Why would my grandson, my precious, completely innocent grandson, warn me so desperately against food his own mother had lovingly prepared? What could a 7-year-old possibly know that I didn't? I looked up slowly at Lena, still stunningly beautiful and perfectly composed at the head of the polished table, serving everyone with that radiant, practiced smile I remembered so clearly from her childhood. She caught my questioning stare and her expression shifted for just a split second. Something dark and cold flickered dangerously in her green eyes before the maternal warmth quickly returned. "Mom, why aren't you eating yet?" she asked with syrupy sweetness, tilting her head with fake concern. "I made your absolute favourite recipe, the one from Grandma's old cookbook." The entire room fell silent. All eyes turned toward me expectantly. Mark stopped mid-sentence in his story. Even little Sophie glanced up from her phone screen with curious interest. I picked up the silver spoon with violently shaking fingers, the metal feeling unnaturally cold and heavy in my palm. Tommy's small hand squeezed mine desperately under the table, a silent, terrified plea that sent chills down my spine. I'm just not very hungry tonight," I managed to whisper. Lena's perfect smile tightened into something sharp and dangerous. "You drove 40 long minutes to get here through traffic, Mum. The absolute least you can do is try my cooking." But Tommy's terrified whisper continued echoing in my mind like a warning bell. "Don't eat it, Grandma. Please, please don't eat it." In that moment, staring down at that innocent-looking bowl of perfectly seasoned stew, I realized with growing horror that something was very, very wrong in my daughter's beautiful house, and my 7-year-old grandson was the only person trying desperately to save my life. Let me tell you exactly what I sacrificed for my daughter Lena over 37 years. When Charles died of that heart attack, Lena was only 15. I was a grieving widow with $847 in our savings account and a mortgage payment of $100 or $200 every month. Most women my age would have crumbled. Instead, I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at 5 a.m. and stocking shelves at the grocery store until midnight. For 3 years, I sold everything precious I owned. My grandmother's antique wedding ring, gone for $650 to pay Lena's SAT prep course, Charles's vintage watch collection that he'd spent decades building, sold piece by piece for $2,300 to cover her senior year expenses. Even my own wedding dress, the one I'd dreamed of passing down, went to a consignment shop for $85 to buy her graduation dress. When Lena got accepted to State University, I took out a second mortgage on our house. $43,000 in student loans weren't enough. I worked weekends at a diner, serving coffee to strangers while my feet screamed in pain, just to send her an extra $200 every month for textbooks and living expenses. 4 years of college, 4 years of me eating rice and beans while she enjoyed dormitory meals and spring break trips. I lost 30 pounds that I never gained back. My hair went completely grey from stress, and I developed arthritis in my hands from the endless cleaning work. But the day she graduated, seeing her walk across that stage in her cap and gown, I thought every sacrifice was worth it. Then came her wedding to Mark. Another $15,000 I didn't have. I liquidated my small retirement account and paid the penalty fees just to give her the dream wedding she deserved. White roses, live band, open bar for 150 guests. I wore a dress from Goodwill and smiled while she danced in her $3,000 gown. "Mum, you're the best mother in the world," she whispered to me that night, tears in her eyes. "I'll never forget everything you've done for me." For years after that, the phone calls came regularly. "Hi, Mum, how are you doing?" We'd chat for an hour about her job, her new house, her plans for children. She'd visit every few weeks, bringing flowers or homemade cookies. But gradually, something shifted. The calls became shorter. "Mum, I can't talk long." The visits became rarer. And when she did come by, the conversation somehow always turned to money. "Mum, you're getting older. Have you thought about what you'll do with the house? You know, property taxes are so expensive now. Wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere smaller? Mark has this friend who's a financial planner. Maybe you should think about liquidating some assets while you're still sharp enough to make good decisions." Sharp enough. As if my 72-year-old brain was already failing. The woman I'd raised, educated, and launched into a successful life was now circling me like a vulture, waiting for me to become weak enough to give up the only security I had left. My home. That's when I realized my biggest mistake. I had taught my daughter that my love could always be bought with sacrifice. And now she was waiting to collect the final payment. Back at that dinner table, Tommy's warning still echoed in my ears as I noticed things that should have been obvious from the moment I walked in. I wasn't sitting in my usual spot. For 12 years, whenever I visited, I always sat next to Lena at the head of the table, the place of honor for the beloved mother and grandmother. Tonight, they'd seated me at the far corner, practically isolated from the family conversation. Like an unwanted guest, they were tolerating. More disturbing was the food service. Mark, Lena, Sophie and Tommy were all eating from the same large serving dishes in the center of the table, passing around the salad bowl, sharing the bread basket, spooning stew from a communal pot. But my meal came on a separate plate, pre-portioned and individually prepared in the kitchen. "Why is Grandma's food different?" Tommy had asked innocently when Lena first brought out my plate. "Grandma has special dietary needs now," Lena replied smoothly, not meeting my eyes. "I made hers separately so it wouldn't upset her stomach." Special dietary needs. I'd never mentioned any dietary restrictions. My stomach was perfectly fine. Throughout the meal, I caught Lena and Mark exchanging meaningful glances across the table. Quick, almost imperceptible looks that seemed to carry entire conversations. When Mark reached for his wineglass, he'd glance at Lena. When she refilled Sophie's water, she'd catch his eye and nod slightly. They were communicating in some kind of silent code, and I was clearly the subject of their secret discussion. "Grandma?" Tommy whispered again when his parents were distracted by Sophie's school story. "Did you see them put something in your water?" His small finger pointed discreetly at my glass, the only one at the table filled with plain water while everyone else enjoyed wine or juice. I looked down at the clear liquid. It looked normal, but why was I the only one drinking water? When I'd arrived, Lena had immediately handed me this specific glass, claiming she'd prepared something special for me to drink. "Tommy, eat your dinner and stop bothering Grandma," Lena snapped suddenly, though her voice carried that fake sweetness that had become her trademark around me. But Tommy wasn't deterred. When his mother turned to help Sophie cut her meat, he leaned close again. Grandma, I saw Mommy and Daddy talking in the kitchen before you came. They said something about making you sleepy. Making me sleepy. My hands began to tremble again. I thought about the strange phone call I'd received earlier that week. Lena had insisted I come for dinner, claiming the whole family missed me terribly. But when I'd suggested bringing dessert, she'd quickly declined. Just bring yourself, Mum. I've got everything perfectly planned. Everything perfectly planned. Those words took on a sinister new meaning as I sat there, watching my own family treat me like an outsider, while my grandson desperately tried to protect me from some invisible danger. The worst part was the pretense. Lena kept up her cheerful mother act, asking about my garden and my book club, while Mark nodded along with practiced interest. But their eyes never quite met mine, and their smiles never reached beyond their lips. I was sitting at a dinner table with people who were supposed to love me, yet I felt more alone and vulnerable than I had in 15 years of widowhood. After pushing the stew around my plate for 20 minutes without taking a single bite, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Tommy's warnings had made it impossible to eat anything, and I needed a moment alone to think clearly about what was happening. As I walked down the familiar hallway toward the guest bathroom, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Low, urgent whispers that made me freeze in place. Lena and Mark were having a private conversation, thinking I was safely out of earshot. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it. She's not eating any of it. Mark's voice carried a sharp edge of frustration. Your kid keeps whispering to her, this whole plan is falling apart. Tommy doesn't know what he's talking about, Lena hissed back. He's 7 years old. But you're right, she's suspicious now. We need to move faster. Move faster? My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The lawyer said if we can prove she's mentally incompetent, the guardianship will be automatic, Mark continued. But she has to show some kind of cognitive decline first. The sedatives were supposed to make her dizzy and confused. Sedatives? My grandson had been trying to save me from being drugged. She's being too careful. Lena's voice was filled with cold calculation. But listen to me, Mark. If she won't give us that house willingly, and if the legal route takes too long, she won't live long enough to keep fighting us. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Won't live long enough. My own daughter, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was talking about my death like it was a business transaction. You really think we can pull this off? Mark asked, doubt creeping into his voice. She's 72 years old, Mark. Old people die from falls, heart attacks, medication mix-ups. No one questions it. And once she's gone, everything transfers to me automatically. The house, her savings account, everything. Everything transfers to me automatically. They'd already planned out how to profit from my death. I stood frozen in that hallway, listening to my daughter and son-in-law plot my murder with the same casual tone they'd used to discuss weekend dinner plans. My legs felt weak, and I had to grip the wall to keep from collapsing. What about the kids? Mark asked. The kids won't remember much. And if they ask questions later, we'll tell them Grandma got sick and passed away peacefully. They're young. They'll get over it. They'll get over it. As if my death would be nothing more than a minor inconvenience for Tommy and Sophie. I heard footsteps moving toward the kitchen door and quickly stumbled into the bathroom, locking it behind me. My reflection in the mirror showed a pale, terrified old woman who finally understood the danger she was in. When I returned to the dining room 5 minutes later, Lena greeted me with that same bright, fake smile. Mum, your stew is getting cold. You really should eat something before you drive home. But now I could see the calculating coldness behind her eyes. This wasn't my loving daughter anymore. This was a predator who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle standing between her and my assets. Actually, I'm feeling a bit tired, I said, grabbing my purse with shaking hands. I think I should head home. Oh, that's too bad, Mark said, but I caught the look of relief that flashed across his face. Drive carefully, Eleanor. As I hugged Tommy goodbye, he squeezed me extra tight and whispered one final warning. "Grandma, don't come back here alone. Promise me." That little boy knew exactly what his parents were planning, and he was the only person in that house trying to keep me alive. Over the next 3 weeks, I started paying attention to patterns I'd been too trusting to notice before. Every single time I visited Lena's house and ate her food, I'd drive home feeling dizzy and exhausted. Not normal tiredness, a heavy, drugged feeling that made me pull over twice on the 40-minute drive home. I'd attributed it to my age, but now I knew better. I started keeping a journal, writing down dates and symptoms. March 15th. Had lunch at Lena's, felt nauseous for 6 hours afterward. March 22nd. Easter dinner, nearly fell asleep at the wheel driving home. April 3rd. Coffee and cake visit, hands shaking uncontrollably by evening. But when I ate meals anywhere else, at my neighbour's house, at the diner downtown, even my own cooking, I felt perfectly fine. The pattern was undeniable. My neighbour Ruth knocked on my door one Tuesday morning, concern written across her weathered face. "Eleanor, honey, you don't look well. You've seemed so tired lately." Ruth had been a registered nurse for 40 years before retiring. If anyone would notice physical changes, it would be her. "Ruth," I said carefully, "hypothetically speaking, if someone was being given sedatives without their knowledge, what would the symptoms look like?" Her eyes sharpened immediately. Drowsiness, confusion, loss of coordination, nausea. "Why are you asking me this, Eleanor?" I told her everything. The strange dinner, Tommy's warnings, the overheard conversation, my documented symptoms. Ruth listened with growing horror. "You need to save samples of any food they give you," she said firmly. "If someone is drugging you, we need proof." The next Sunday, Lena called with another dinner invitation. "Mum, I made your favourite pot roast. Please come. The kids miss their grandmother." This time I came prepared. While Lena was distracted serving the others, I quickly scraped some of my portion into a small plastic container I'd hidden in my purse. I also managed to pour half my water into a tiny bottle Ruth had given me. "Are you feeling all right, Mum?" Lena asked when she noticed I was barely touching my food again. "You seem distracted lately." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. But Tommy wasn't fooled. When his mother stepped away to get dessert, he leaned over and whispered, "Grandma, you're being smart now. Don't eat any of it." That night, I examined the food samples under my kitchen light. The pot roast looked normal, but when I stirred it with a spoon, I noticed a faint white residue settling at the bottom of the container. The water sample had a barely visible cloudy appearance that definitely wasn't normal. Ruth came over the next morning with a magnifying glass. "See this?" She pointed to tiny granules clinging to the meat. "This isn't seasoning, Eleanor. Someone ground up pills and mixed them into your food." My hands started shaking as the full reality hit me. My daughter wasn't just planning to kill me eventually. She'd been slowly poisoning me for months, probably testing dosages and waiting for the right moment to give me a fatal amount. "We need to get these samples tested," Ruth said. "I have a friend who works at the medical lab downtown. She'll run them quietly, no questions asked." As I stared at those contaminated food samples sitting on my kitchen counter, I realized this was my proof. Physical evidence that my own daughter was systematically drugging me. The woman I'd raised and sacrificed everything for was trying to kill me one meal at a time. 3 days after discovering the pill residue, I couldn't contain myself any longer. I had to confront Lena directly, even though Ruth warned me it was dangerous. I drove to her house Thursday morning, when I knew Mark would be at work and the kids would be at school. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it. The moment I'd demand answers from my own daughter. Lena opened the door with that familiar bright smile, but I saw her face tighten when she noticed I wasn't carrying the usual flowers or gift I brought on visits. "Mom, what a nice surprise. Come in, I'll make us some coffee." "No coffee, Lena," I said, stepping into her pristine living room. "We need to talk." I pulled out the plastic container with the food samples, setting it on her expensive glass coffee table with shaking hands. I know what you've been doing to me. For just a split second, her mask slipped. I saw genuine fear flash across her face before the concerned daughter act resumed. Mum, what are you talking about? You're scaring me. The sedatives, Lena. The pills you've been grinding up in my food. I have samples. I heard you and Mark talking about making me incompetent so you could take my house. She stared at me for a long moment, then sat down heavily on her cream-coloured sofa. When she looked up, her expression had completely changed. Gone was any pretense of warmth or love. You're losing it, Mom, she said coldly. You're 72 years old and you're becoming paranoid. Do you have any idea how crazy you sound right now? I'm not crazy, Lena. I have proof. Proof of what? Some leftover food scraps? She laughed, but it was harsh and bitter. Mum, this is exactly what I've been trying to tell Mark. You're showing signs of dementia. These paranoid delusions, the confusion, forgetting things we've discussed. Forgetting things. I hadn't forgotten anything. You need help, Mum. Professional help. And you certainly can't keep living alone in that big house when you're having episodes like this. Episodes? She was twisting everything, making me sound like I was having mental breakdowns instead of uncovering her murder plot. I know exactly what I heard, Lena. You said I wouldn't live long enough to keep fighting you. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. I never said any such thing. But the fact that you think I did proves my point perfectly. You're imagining conversations that never happened. She stood up and walked to her phone. I think I need to call Dr. Harrison and schedule you an evaluation. This level of paranoia isn't normal for someone your age. Don't you dare call anyone, I snapped, standing up on unsteady legs. I'm not paranoid, and I'm not having delusions. Look at yourself, Mom. You're shaking. You're making wild accusations against your own family. You're collecting food scraps like some kind of detective. Does that seem normal to you? Every word she spoke was designed to make me doubt my own sanity. But I knew what I'd experienced. I knew what I'd overheard. We're going to get you the help you need, she continued in that patronising tone. And in the meantime, maybe it's time to seriously consider selling the house and moving somewhere with more supervision, for your own safety. There it was, the real agenda, wrapped up in fake concern for my well-being. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. I'm not selling anything, Lena, and I'm not crazy. Mum, please don't leave like this. Let me drive you home. You shouldn't be driving when you're this upset and confused. But as I walked out of her house, I heard her immediately pick up the phone. She wasn't calling a doctor to help me. She was calling Mark to tell him their plan had been discovered. Ruth's friend at the medical lab called me Tuesday morning with results that made my blood run cold. Eleanor, I found traces of lorazepam and diphenhydramine in both food samples, Dr. Patricia Morse explained over the phone. Those are powerful sedatives. The concentration levels suggest someone was giving you therapeutic doses, enough to cause drowsiness and confusion without immediately killing you. Lorazepam, diphenhydramine. I wrote down the names with trembling fingers. Dr. Morse, would these drugs be enough to make someone appear mentally incompetent? Absolutely. Long-term use would cause memory problems, disorientation, difficulty concentrating. If someone didn't know they were being drugged, they might think they were developing dementia. Perfect cover for a guardianship claim. Armed with the lab results and my recorded conversations, I drove straight to the police station downtown. Officer Kevin Martinez, a tired-looking man in his 40s, listened to my story with barely concealed impatience. Let me get this straight, Ma'am. You think your daughter is trying to poison you so she can steal your house? I don't think it, officer. I have proof. I placed the lab report on his desk, along with a transcript of the recorded conversation I'd typed up the night before. He glanced at the papers for maybe 30 seconds. Mrs. Thornton, family disputes over money are unfortunately common, especially when elderly parents are involved. But what you're describing sounds more like miscommunication than attempted murder. Miscommunication? I stared at him in disbelief. Officer Martinez, I have chemical evidence of sedatives in my food and a recording of them discussing increasing the dosage. Ma'am, with all due respect, these lab results could have innocent explanations. Maybe your daughter was trying to help you sleep better, and conversations can be taken out of context, especially when family emotions are running high. He was dismissing me just like Lena had. Just another confused old woman making wild accusations. What would it take for you to investigate this seriously? I asked, frustration rising in my voice. Well, we'd need clear evidence of a crime in progress. Maybe if you ended up in the hospital with an overdose, or if there were witness testimony from someone outside the family. If I ended up in the hospital. He wanted me to nearly die before he'd take my claims seriously. Officer Martinez, by the time I'm in the hospital with an overdose, it might be too late to save my life. I understand your concerns, Mrs. Thornton, but we can't arrest people based on suspicious food samples and family arguments. My advice? Talk to a lawyer about your estate planning. Make sure your assets are protected legally. That's really more of a civil matter than a criminal one. A civil matter? My daughter trying to murder me was just a civil matter. I left the police station feeling more alone and vulnerable than ever. The one institution that was supposed to protect me had basically told me to wait until I was nearly dead before they'd care. But Officer Martinez had given me one crucial piece of advice. Talk to a lawyer. That afternoon, I called the law office that had handled Charles's estate 15 years ago. Harold Brennan was now in his 70s himself, but his voice was sharp and alert when I explained my situation. Eleanor, this is very serious. Financial elder abuse combined with attempted poisoning. We need to document everything and get you protected immediately. Finally, someone who believed me. Mr. Brennan, what can we do legally? First, we get a restraining order to keep them away from you. Then we file a police report with my office's backing. They take these cases more seriously when they come from an attorney, and if they're planning to file for guardianship, we need to get ahead of that. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. How long do we have? Based on what you've told me, not long. If they're escalating the dosage, they're probably planning to make their move within days. We need to act fast. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at the lab results and the recording device. I had the evidence. I had a lawyer who believed me. Now I just had to stay alive long enough to use them. Harold Brennan's prediction proved terrifyingly accurate. 3 days after our meeting, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door with legal papers. Lena and Mark had filed for emergency guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent and a danger to myself. The petition was scheduled for a hearing in exactly 1 week. They moved fast, Harold said grimly when I called him in panic. But this actually works in our favour. They're rushing, which means they'll make mistakes. The guardianship petition painted a devastating picture of me as a confused, paranoid old woman. According to their sworn statements, I had been exhibiting signs of severe cognitive decline, including delusional thinking, inappropriate accusations against family members, and inability to manage basic daily activities. They had documentation from Dr. Richard Harrison, Lena's family doctor, stating that I showed clear symptoms of dementia during a recent phone consultation. A phone consultation I'd never had. This is all fabricated, I told Harold, my hands shaking as I read through their lies. Of course it is, but look at how thorough they were. Medical opinion, witnesses' statements, financial records showing concerning spending patterns. They've been planning this for months. The most chilling part was their proposed solution. If the court granted guardianship, I would be immediately moved to Sunset Manor nursing facility for my own safety and proper medical supervision. All my assets would be transferred to Lena as my legal guardian. Sunset Manor. I'd visited that place once to see a friend. It was where people went to die, forgotten by their families. Here's what's going to happen, Harold explained during our strategy session. They'll present themselves as the loving, concerned family trying to help their confused mother. They'll have character witnesses, medical documentation, maybe even photos of your supposedly declining living conditions. What do we present? The truth. Lab results proving you were being drugged, audio recordings of them discussing murder, and most importantly, will demonstrate that you're completely mentally competent. The week before the hearing, Lena called me repeatedly with fake concern. "Mum, we heard you hired a lawyer. You're just making this harder on yourself. We're only trying to help you." Each call was undoubtedly being recorded by their legal team to use as evidence of my paranoid delusions about family persecution. Harold advised me not to answer. Let them dig their own grave. Every lie they tell under oath will be another felony charge. 2 days before the hearing, Ruth helped me prepare my testimony. Remember, stick to facts and dates. Don't get emotional, even when they attack your character. The evidence will speak for itself. But I was terrified. What if the judge believed their fabricated medical reports? What if my own recorded evidence wasn't enough? At 72 years old, would anyone really believe I was capable of uncovering an elaborate murder plot? The night before the hearing, Tommy called me. Someone had given him my phone number. Probably the same person who'd been slipping him information to protect me. "Grandma," his small voice whispered through the phone, "I want to tell the judge the truth about Mommy and Daddy. I saw everything. I know what they did." My heart broke for that brave little boy. "Tommy, sweetheart, you might have to be very brave tomorrow." "I'm not scared, Grandma. I don't want them to hurt you anymore." The next morning I put on my best dress, the navy blue one I'd worn to Charles's funeral, and drove to the courthouse. Lena and Mark were already there with their lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. They sat together looking like the perfect, concerned family. When they saw me walk in with Harold, Lena's mask slipped for just a moment. I saw rage flash across her face before the worried daughter act resumed. "All rise," the bailiff called, the Honourable Judge Patricia Coleman presiding. This was it. Everything I'd worked for, all the evidence I'd gathered, came down to the next hour. Either I would walk out of that courtroom as a free woman, or I'd be drugged into submission at Sunset Manor while my daughter liquidated everything I'd worked my entire life to build. Judge Coleman looked down at the papers before her, then directly at me. "Mrs. Thornton, your daughter and son-in-law have petitioned this court to assume guardianship over you due to concerns about your mental capacity. How do you respond to these allegations?" "Your Honour," I said, standing with as much dignity as I could muster, "I am completely mentally competent, and I have evidence that my daughter and son-in-law have been systematically poisoning me in order to steal my assets." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Lena's lawyer immediately stood up. "Your Honour, this is exactly the type of paranoid delusion we've been documenting. Mrs. Thornton has been making wild accusations against her loving family for weeks." Judge Coleman raised her hand for silence. "I'll hear all the evidence before making any determinations. Counsel, please present your case for guardianship." For the next 20 minutes, Lena's lawyer painted a heartbreaking picture of a confused, declining elderly woman who needed protection from her own poor judgment. They presented Dr. Harrison's report, claiming I had shown significant cognitive impairment during our phone conversation. "Dr. Harrison," Harold cross-examined, "can you tell the court the exact date and time of this alleged phone consultation with Mrs. Thornton?" Dr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it was approximately 2 weeks ago. I don't have the exact time documented." "You don't have documentation of a medical consultation that you used to support a guardianship petition. Isn't that standard practice, Doctor?" Yes. Normally we would document such calls." Harold smiled. "That's because this consultation never happened, did it, Doctor?" Before Dr. Harrison could answer, Harold turned to the judge. "Your Honour, I'd like to present evidence that will prove Mrs. Thornton has been the victim of a systematic campaign of financial elder abuse and attempted murder." He placed the lab report on the evidence table. "This is an independent laboratory analysis of food samples taken from the defendant's home. It shows the presence of lorazepam and diphenhydramine, powerful sedatives that would cause exactly the symptoms described in their petition. The courtroom fell silent. Lena's face had gone completely pale. Furthermore, Harold continued, we have audio recordings of the defendants discussing their plan to drug Mrs. Thornton and, if necessary, cause her accidental death. Objection! Lena's lawyer shot up. Those recordings were obtained without consent and are inadmissible. Judge Coleman looked stern. In cases involving elder abuse and potential attempted murder, I'll allow the evidence. Proceed, Mr. Brennan. Harold connected a small speaker to his phone. This recording was made 5 days ago in the defendant's kitchen while they believed Mrs. Thornton was in the bathroom. The audio quality was crystal clear. Lena's voice filled the courtroom. The sedatives should work within the next few weeks if we increase the dosage. Gasps echoed through the room. I watched Lena's face crumble as her own words condemned her. Mark's voice followed. And if that doesn't work? Then came the most damning moment. Lena's cold, calculating response. Accidents happen to elderly people all the time, Mark. Falls downstairs, gas leaks, medication overdoses. The important thing is that we get power of attorney before she becomes completely non-functional. The silence in that courtroom was deafening. Judge Coleman's face showed barely controlled outrage. But Harold wasn't finished. He played the next segment. The lawyer said once we have medical documentation of cognitive decline, the guardianship is automatic. Then we can liquidate everything. The house, her savings, the life insurance policy. And if she happens to have a tragic accident during the transition period, well, grief makes people forget to ask too many questions. Judge Coleman stopped the recording. I've heard enough. Her voice was ice cold as she stared at Lena and Mark. In 30 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered such calculated predatory behaviour toward a vulnerable family member. Lena tried one last desperate play. Your Honour, my mother is clearly unstable if she's secretly recording family conversations. This proves she needs supervision. Ms. Patterson, the judge cut her off sharply, your mother was gathering evidence to save her own life, and based on what I've just heard, she was absolutely justified in doing so. Judge Coleman turned to me with something that looked like admiration. Mrs. Thornton, you have shown remarkable courage and mental acuity in uncovering this conspiracy. There is clearly no basis for guardianship. In fact, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into attempted elder abuse and conspiracy to commit murder. The gavel came down with a thunderous crack. Petition for guardianship denied. Court officers, please detain Mr. and Mrs. Patterson for questioning. As handcuffs clicked around Lena's wrists, she finally looked at me with pure hatred instead of fake concern. You stupid old woman, she snarled. You have no idea what you've just done. But I knew exactly what I'd done. I'd saved my own life. Just when I thought justice had been served, Judge Coleman made an announcement that changed everything. Given the serious nature of these charges and the presence of minor children in this household, I'm ordering an immediate custody evaluation. The children's welfare is paramount in this situation. A social worker had been quietly sitting in the back of the courtroom throughout the proceedings. Now she stepped forward as Lena and Mark were led away in handcuffs. Your Honour, said Ms. Rebecca Santos from Child Protective Services, we've been monitoring this case since the allegations came to light. We have grave concerns about the children's safety and psychological well-being. That's when I saw Tommy sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom with his sister, Sophie. They'd been there the whole time, listening to their parents being arrested for trying to murder their grandmother. Tommy Peterson, Judge Coleman called gently. Would you please come forward? My brave little grandson walked into that courtroom with his shoulders squared and his chin up. At 7 years old, he looked like a tiny soldier marching into battle. Tommy, the judge said softly, I need to ask you some important questions. Can you tell me what you saw at home regarding your grandmother's food? Tommy's voice was clear and strong. I saw Daddy put white powder in Grandma's soup. He told Mommy it would make Grandma sleepy so she wouldn't fight about the house anymore. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. When did you see this happen, Tommy? Lots of times, every time Grandma came for dinner. Daddy would grind up pills with the back of a spoon and stir them into her food when he thought nobody was looking. But I was always watching because I love my grandma. Tears started streaming down my face. This child had been protecting me all along. Tommy, Judge Coleman continued, did you ever hear your parents talking about your grandmother? Yes, Your Honor. They said if Grandma wouldn't give them her house, they would make her sick until she had to go live in the old people's place, and then they could sell everything. Did they say anything else about your grandmother? Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper, but everyone heard him clearly. Mommy said old people die easy, and nobody would ask questions if Grandma had an accident. The impact of those words from a 7-year-old's mouth was devastating. Several people in the courtroom gasped audibly. Tommy, the judge asked gently, why didn't you tell any adults what you saw? I tried to tell Grandma, but I couldn't say it out loud because Mommy and Daddy would get mad. So I whispered to her not to eat the food. I thought maybe she would understand. Judge Coleman leaned forward with obvious concern. Were you scared, Tommy? Yes, Your Honor. I was scared they would hurt Grandma, and I was scared they would be mad at me for telling. But Grandma is the only person who really loves me and Sophie. She always brings us presents and hugs us and reads us stories. I didn't want the bad medicine to make her die. I couldn't contain myself anymore. Your Honor, may I? Of course, Mrs. Thornton. I walked over to Tommy and knelt down to his level. You saved my life, sweetheart. You are the bravest little boy I've ever known. He threw his arms around my neck and whispered, I'm sorry I couldn't stop them from trying to hurt you, Grandma. You did stop them, Tommy. You warned me every single time, and you helped me figure out what was happening. You're my hero. Judge Coleman watched this exchange with obvious emotion. Tommy, you did exactly the right thing. You protected someone you love, and that took incredible courage. She turned to Ms. Santos. What's your recommendation for custody? Your Honor, given the criminal charges against the parents and the clear emotional bond between the children and their grandmother, we recommend immediate temporary custody be granted to Mrs. Thornton, pending a full investigation. I looked up in shock. Custody? I'd come to court to save my own life, but now I might gain something even more precious, the chance to protect and raise my grandchildren. Mrs. Thornton, Judge Coleman said, are you prepared to take temporary custody of Tommy and Sophie while their parents face criminal prosecution? I looked at Tommy's hopeful face, then at Sophie sitting quietly in the hallway, probably confused and scared by everything happening around her. Yes, Your Honor. I would be honoured to take care of them. The gavel came down again. Temporary custody granted to Eleanor Thornton. Children's Services will provide support and monitoring. As we walked out of that courthouse together, Tommy holding my hand, Sophie clinging to my other side, I realised something profound had happened. Lena and Mark had tried to destroy me to get my house. Instead, their evil plan had given me the most precious gift imaginable, a second chance to raise children who truly needed my love and protection. 6 months later, I stood in that same courthouse watching Lena and Mark being sentenced for attempted murder, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Lena Patterson, Judge Coleman announced solemnly, you have been found guilty of systematically poisoning your own mother with intent to steal her assets and ultimately cause her death. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison. Mark received 10 years for his role in the conspiracy. Dr. Harrison, who had fabricated medical records, lost his license and received 3 years for fraud. But the real justice wasn't in their prison sentences. It was in the life I'd built with Tommy and Sophie over those 6 months. My house, the same house Lena had schemed to steal, was now filled with children's laughter again. Tommy's artwork covered my refrigerator. Sophie's piano practice echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. I'd converted Charles's old office into a bedroom for Sophie, painted bright yellow with butterflies on the walls. Every morning, I made them breakfast in the kitchen, where I'd once sat alone, wondering if my own daughter was trying to kill me. Now Tommy helped me flip pancakes while Sophie set the table, both of them chattering about school friends and weekend plans. The transformation went both ways. Taking care of them had given me energy I didn't know I still possessed. At 73 years old, I was driving to soccer practice, helping with homework, hosting sleepovers. My neighbours marvelled at how vibrant I'd become. Ruth, who'd become like a sister through this ordeal, visited us every Sunday for dinner. "Eleanor," she said one evening, watching me referee a board game argument between the kids, "you saved more than your own life. You saved theirs too." She was right. During the custody proceedings, we'd learned that Lena and Mark had been treating the children as accessories to their perfect family image. Tommy had been developing anxiety from the constant tension at home. Sophie had started having nightmares about something bad happening to me. Now they were thriving. Tommy's teacher called to tell me his grades had improved dramatically and he'd stopped having behavioural problems in class. Sophie had joined the school choir and made 3 new friends. They were healing, just like I was. Harold Brennan had become more than just my lawyer. He was now a trusted friend who checked on us regularly. "You know, Eleanor," he told me during one of our coffee meetings, "I've handled hundreds of elder abuse cases, but I've never seen someone fight back as effectively as you did." "I had good motivation," I replied, watching Tommy and Sophie play in the park across from the cafe. "I wasn't just fighting for my house or my money. I was fighting for my life, and ultimately, for theirs." The most healing moment came on a quiet Tuesday evening. Tommy was reading in his room when he called out, "Grandma, can you come here?" I found him sitting on his bed with a drawing he'd been working on. It showed 3 figures, a tall woman with grey hair, a small boy, and a little girl, standing in front of a house with flowers in the garden. "This is our family," he said simply. "You, me, and Sophie, in our house. Our house. Our family. Not the house Lena had tried to steal, but the home we'd created together." As I tucked him in that night, Tommy looked up at me with those serious eyes that had seen too much for his age. "Grandma, are you happy we live with you now?" "Tommy," I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead, "taking care of you and Sophie is the greatest joy of my life. You saved me first, remember? Now we save each other." That night, I sat in my living room, the same room where I'd once trembled in fear, wondering if my own daughter was planning my murder. Now it was filled with children's books, art supplies, and the comfortable chaos of a real family. I learned something important through this nightmare. Betrayal often comes from the ones you've sacrificed the most for, but redemption can come from the ones who need your love the most. Sometimes the family you choose, or the family that chooses you, is stronger than the family you were born into. At 73 years old, I wasn't just surviving. I was truly living again. Would you have fought back like I did? Would you have risked everything to protect not just your assets, but your life and the innocent children caught in the middle? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories of courage inspire me every day.